Well, previously, earlier in the week, we talked about how that we shouldn't partner or share or become walk in basically lockstep with the works of darkness, people who are committed to walking in a way that's not truth, it's not righteous, it's not good. Here in verse 11, he kind of reiterates in a little bit different way, because he again goes back to our metaphor of fruit, and he says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Again, we talked about yesterday how that the fruit is really the consequence of the root. That you can't get apples off a pear tree. And I have both of them growing in my yard, so I know this for a fact. I get pears off the pear trees, I get apples off the apple tree. And I've never found them cross-pollinating. And he's just simply saying you got to understand that evil can't produce anything that's good. Even though it may be presented as good, even though it may be look like it's profiting and beneficial, at some point it's just going to turn into the putrid thing that it actually is. And so he says, don't have anything to do with something that's fruitful deeds of darkness. And a fruitful deed of darkness is something that people are doing that's just wrong. And he says, and don't pretend like it's okay. I think this is what's most troubling to many of us as we look at churches now that are basically saying we just need to love the homosexual, and I agree with that, but loving them doesn't mean that we don't tell them the truth. That it is sin, and it is a damnable sin, and they need to repent if they want to go to heaven. The same way with, we had a couple who said that their Sunday school teacher was a transgender, and they decided to leave that church, and I think I couldn't have run out of there fast enough. Not that I hate transgender people. I feel terribly sorry for people who have this kind of dysmorphia, who are so confused about their identity. There has to be some kind of trauma and tragedy that led them to making that decision. But having said that, it still is a suicidal path. It's a self-destructive path. It's not one that will lead to any good results. And so when we just go along with stuff and don't speak out and aren't willing to speak the truth in love, but simply saying, I'm not objecting to your behavior because I find your behavior offensive. I'm objecting to your behavior because it's not only offensive, but it's destructive. It'll destroy you. It'll lead to no good end. And that's why he said we have the responsibility to expose the fruitless deeds of darkness. And I say, if there's any pastors who happen to be listening to me, I said, friend, if you're not willing to say that certain things, that fornication and adultery and drug abuse and alcoholism and homosexuality and transsexuality and pedophilia and all, if you're not willing to say those things are evil and they're wrong, and that's what the word expose here means. It means to reprove it, to convict it, but basically to point out in various ways that something that someone is doing is wrong, and to be able and equipped to explain to them why it's wrong. It's just really that simple. I think it's amazing to me that even a guy like Dave Chappelle, who quite honestly, his comedy is just too profane for me to sit through and enjoy. But at the same time, I have to commend him for having the courage to simply say the idea that a man can become a woman is ludicrous. Every one of us came out from between the legs of a woman, he said. We didn't come out of the legs of a man. It's crazy, and we hear the rhetoric and the changing of language and the use of pronouns and all the rest of it. Even Kraft has one of their food good things has a whole thing on instruction on kids how they can know how to use the correct pronouns. All of this is insanity. It's crazy. It's nuts, and the point is that we're called to simply say, that's nuts, that's crazy, that's lunacy, that's heresy, it's evil, it's darkness. And I'm just amazed that places that call themselves church and call themselves ministers of Christ would do something so reprehensible. Yet again, doesn't the Bible say that would be the way it would be in the end times? In fact, Paul goes on in verse 12 to say, for it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. And here we come across the word shameful. Now, we're told over and over again, well, that's the problem. People struggle with shame. And I disagree. I think the big problem is we aren't ashamed. There are so many things that we should be ashamed. There's things that even as Christians we may say, we may think, we may do. And the Holy Spirit is saying, shame on you. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be thinking that way. You shouldn't be talking that way. You should be ashamed and embarrassed to let yourself go in that direction. No, I know there's such a thing as false guilt, and people feel shame for things they shouldn't. But the bigger problem is the fact that, as the prophet Isaiah said, they have no shamefacedness, the way the King James put it. They do things that they should be ashamed of, and they don't feel any shame. And I'm simply saying that some things are just so shameful that they shouldn't even be objects of our conversation. We should just simply avoid them unless we are called to expose them to people who are caught up in them, and to very, very clearly say what you're doing is a damnable thing. It's an abomination in the sight of God, and it'll take you to hell. And that would include other things that we kind of give a pass to, like lying and exaggeration, distortion, or how about just simply greed, where we take advantage of other people so that we can enrich ourselves. Those things are just as damnable in the eyes of God, and are things that shouldn't be part of the Christian's life. A Christian should be known for his or her graciousness and generosity. We have a T-shirt that we do a Thanksgiving food campaign every year, and our basically our statement of purpose is that generosity changes people. And I think it really does. When you're generous to people, especially those who don't expect generosity, it really opens people up to you as a person, because generosity is essentially an action that communicates to another that they're valuable and important to you, that they have worth in your eyes. And if there's something that we call it shame, but the reality is most people feel I have no worth, I have no value, oftentimes because they've been used and abused by other people in relationships in the past. And when we treat people with that respect and that dignity, and we show them that they're valuable, yet at the same time we don't just allow them to justify things that are not right. It's a really, really tough thing, because I can say quite honestly that I'm not homophobic. I don't get uncomfortable about gays. I had friends before I was a Christian who were gay, and I've met and known many people and worked with people who are homosexuals. I mean, they're not weird to me. I think that gay is a misnomer, because I don't think they're all that happy. You can't live in that kind of sinfulness. I think that's why many times they're over the top in their displays of gregarity and hilarity and all the stuff. But the reality is there's a deep emptiness inside that they're trying to fill. As I was sitting on a plane one time with a young lady, I was the last guy on the plane, just almost missed my flight, and I'm rushing in. I sit down in my seat, and the young lady immediately looks at me. She's had a few drinks or more by that point in time, and she was very friendly, and she said, "Hi, my name is such and such." She said, "What is your name?" And I told her, and she says, "What do you do, Ken?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." And she says, "Well, I'm a lesbian." And without even thinking it, I just looked her in the eyes. I looked at her and said, "Honey, you're not a lesbian." And she's kind of stunned. And I said, "What you are is you are a little girl who got deeply hurt by some man in your life, or many men, and you've gone to this lifestyle to protect yourself." And tears started coming down her cheeks, and she looked at me and said, "You are a pastor, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what I said." But it was like this whole thing is I wasn't demeaning her, but I did understand what had happened. And I find that everybody, whether they're a crook or a liar or a cheat, or whatever the thing is, the behavior that really ends up in harming other people, they were first a victim of somebody else. And now they've adopted being a victimizer because they think that's the way to survive. And I'm just saying that we need to be able to lovingly say to people, there is another way. There is a choice. There is a way out. You can live a life with right relationship with God. But you have to begin by admitting that what you're doing is not of God, and it's not right, and it's not good, it's not true, it's not right. Confess it as sin. God will forgive it, and then He'll begin to free you from that choice, that lifestyle choice. He'll change you from the inside out. And all I can say is I just know people even people who are in the trans lifestyle who you thought they're lost forever. And yet they've been able to free themselves from that bondage. So but what they're waiting for is somebody to have enough courage to speak the truth to them in a gracious and loving way. Yes, is there a right time and a right context? Absolutely. I don't think we should go around just blurting things out to people without warning. But at the same time, if you meet somebody who has a lifestyle that is self-destructive and evil, the best way is just simply saying, tell me how this came about in your life. Why did you make this decision? How did you come to this thing that you've come to? And you'll be surprised that people are willing to talk about, and oftentimes they'll share a story of pain and trauma. So anyway, continue. We got one more left this week as we move on to verse 13, and look forward to coming to the end of this week. And I'm praying that the stuff I've shared will be useful. That's always my prayer. I don't want to waste your time. The most precious, valuable possession you have is your time, and I'm trying to be careful not to waste it. So God bless you, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.